He told me the collar would hide everything. He was right. It always did. My name is Seo Jiwon, and I have spent the last 3 years of my life becoming an expert in the art of stillness, still hands, still face, still breathing even when everything inside me was screaming. Tonight was no different. A black fitted shirt, buttoned all the way to my throat, sleeves rolled down, cuffed at the wrist. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in the single bathroom of my semi-basement apartment in Mapo-gu, Seoul, and I adjusted the collar for the 4th time in 2 minutes. The fabric scratched. It always scratched. I told myself it was fine. Fine was my favorite lie. The event tonight was the Cheongdam Social Gala, one of those insufferable black tie affairs where powerful people gathered in rooms that smelled like expensive cologne and quiet cruelty. And everyone pretended the power dynamics didn't exist while absolutely enforcing them every second. My boss, Kwon Dae-hyun, a man whose smile was sharper than any blade I'd ever seen, had insisted I attend as his personal assistant. I was good at my job, meticulous, quiet. I made his problems disappear before he noticed they existed. He said I was invaluable. He meant I was convenient. I buttoned the collar one more time, checked the mirror. The shirt was perfect. No one would see anything. That was the entire point. I grabbed my bag and left before I could overthink it, which, for me, was already 3 overthinks too late. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul, up on Sewol Row, where the city sprawled below like a jewelry box someone had kicked open. The Han River shimmered in the distance. Lights everywhere. I stepped out of the taxi and immediately wanted to get back in. The entrance alone had enough designer fabric to clothe an entire province. Men in tailored suits, women with necks draped in jewels, and somewhere inside that glittering building, a room full of alphas, all of them radiating that particular brand of authority that made the air feel like it was vibrating at a frequency I wasn't designed for. I was an omega, unregistered, suppressed, scent masked with 3 layers of blocker that cost me half a week's salary every month. To anyone with a nose, I smelled like nothing, which was exactly what I needed to smell like. Because alone, an unregistered omega at a high society alpha event was not a guest. He was a problem waiting to be noticed. I adjusted my collar, walked in anyway. Dae-hyun found me in the lobby before I'd made it 10 steps. He was already holding 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the expression he always wore in public, warm, charming, the kind of face that made people trust him instantly. I knew better. I'd worked for him long enough to understand that the warmth was performance. The charm was currency. I look stiff. I look professional. I look stiff. I look professional, I said. Same thing in your case. He smiled and clinked his glass against mine. Relax, smile. You're here to make me look organized, not like I dragged a government employee to a party. You did drag a government employee to a party. And yet here we are. He steered me by the shoulder toward the main hall. The Shin brothers are attending tonight, all 3 of them. Don't stare, don't speak unless spoken to, and for the love of every god currently watching over Seoul, do not spill anything near them. I stopped walking. The Shin brothers. As in Shin Raehan, Shin Yujin, and Shin Dohwan. The very same. I looked at him. He looked back at me with the perfectly composed expression of a man who had made a decision and fully intended to let someone else suffer the consequences of it. The Shin triplets were not a rumor. They were not an urban legend. They were not the kind of thing you read about in crime blogs at 2 in the morning and convinced yourself was exaggerated. They were real, they were present, and they controlled more of Seoul's underworld than most people controlled their own bank accounts. Raehan was the eldest by 4 minutes, cold, precise. The kind of man who could ruin your entire career with a single phone call and then sleep perfectly afterwards. Yujin was the one who smiled, which was somehow more terrifying than not smiling. And Dohwan was the quiet one, which anyone with any sense knew meant he was the most dangerous. 3 alphas, same face, different ways to end you. I want a raise, I said. You want to keep your job, Daehyun corrected pleasantly, and walked us both into the hall. The room was enormous and golden and loud in that specifically muted way that money always managed, where every sound was expensive and every silence was intentional. I stayed close to the wall, champagne in hand, watching the crowd with the practiced detachment of someone who had spent years making himself forgettable. It worked, mostly. Then I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement. Something quieter than that. A shift in the air. I already knew what I was going to find. I already knew what I was going to find. 3 men, standing at the top of the grand staircase like they'd been placed there by someone with a very specific agenda and excellent taste in staging. Identical in face, sharp jaw, dark eyes, with the particular stillness of people who had never once needed to prove anything to anyone. Different in posture. The one on the left stood with arms crossed, surveying the room like he was calculating its worth. The one in the center was already smiling at something his brother said, light catching the edge of his expression. The one on the right was looking at nothing, or appeared to be, but something about the angle of his head made me think he was cataloging every exit in the building. On Shin Raehan, Shin Yujin, Shin Dohwan, my collar suddenly felt very tight. I turned away, took a slow sip of champagne, and told myself the prickling at the back of my neck was just the ventilation system. It wasn't the ventilation system. I adjusted my collar anyway. It wasn't the ventilation system. I knew that the moment Shin Yujin, the one with the smile, the dangerous one who looked like trouble wrapped in a tailored suit, turned his head and looked directly at me from across the room. Not near me, not in my general direction. At me. I did what any reasonable, self-preserving person would do. I looked away, took a calm sip of champagne, and pretended I was deeply fascinated by the floral arrangement to my left. Enormous white peonies. Very interesting. Life-changing even. I was a man completely absorbed by flowers and not at all aware that one of the most powerful alphas in Seoul had just clocked me like I was a problem he was deciding whether to solve tonight or tomorrow. The peonies were not helping. I shifted slightly behind a taller guest and mentally recalculated every decision that had brought me to this specific room on this specific night. The list was short. Daehyun. It always came back to Daehyun. Speaking of whom, I turned to find him and discovered he had vanished with the particular efficiency of a man who had already accomplished his goal and was now someone else's problem. I was alone. At a gala. With 3 alpha mafia lords who collectively owned half of Gangnam and probably had opinions about Omegas who showed up unregistered to their social events. Fantastic. I adjusted my collar and moved toward the far end of the room where the crowd was thinner and the exits were closer. Not because I was nervous, because I was strategic. There is a difference, and I was absolutely certain of it. I found a quieter corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows, end of scent blocker. Collar up, sleeves down of scent blocker. Collar up, sleeves down. I was invisible. I was fine. You've adjusted that collar 6 times since you walked in. The voice came from my left, low, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud because it had never once in its life been ignored. I turned. Shin Dohwan stood approximately 2 feet away from me, eating a glass of whiskey held loosely in one hand. Dark eyes settled on me with the calm focus of someone who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. Up close he was, and I say this with full resentment, unfairly constructed. Sharp features. Dark suit that fit like it had been personally apologized into existence by the fabric. And that stillness. That particular, deliberate stillness that made the air around him feel different. I was like standing next to something that hadn't decided yet whether to be dangerous. I looked at him. He looked at me. I have a sensitive neck, I said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the idea of one, considered and then filed away for later. Dohwan, he said, like that was an answer. I know who you are, I said. Jiwon. And before you ask no, I'm not interesting. I'm not available. And I'm not going to be useful to whatever calculation is currently running behind your eyes. That one actually got a reaction. Brief. A slight tilt of his head, like I'd said something that didn't fit the expected pattern, and he was deciding what to do with it. I wasn't calculating anything, he said. People like you are always calculating something. People like me. Quiet ones, I said. The ones who stand at parties looking at nothing. You're not looking at nothing. You're looking at everything and letting everyone think it's nothing. It's a good strategy. I use it myself. The non-smile came back, slightly more defined this time. And yet here you are, telling me exactly how it works. Consider it a professional courtesy, I said, one invisible person to another. He studied me for a moment. I kept my expression neutral and held my champagne glass with the steady hands of a man who was absolutely not cataloging every possible escape route in his peripheral vision. Then his gaze dropped just briefly, just for a second, to my collar. Not suggestively, not with hunger, with something quieter than that. Something that felt uncomfortably close to recognition. My hand moved before I could stop it. Fingertips brushing the fabric at my throat, pressing it upward. Us said anything for 3 full seconds. Us said anything for 3 full seconds, which in the context of that particular silence felt considerably longer. Jiwon see? He said finally, voice lower now, like he'd decided to keep whatever he was thinking between the two of us and the city lights outside. Don't, I said quietly. He paused. Don't notice things, I said. It's a much more peaceful way to live. He looked at me for one more moment, steady, unreadable, and entirely too perceptive for someone I had met 40 seconds ago. And then he did something I did not expect. He nodded, small, respectful, like he was honoring a boundary he hadn't been asked to honor yet. Enjoy your evening, he said, and stepped away. I turned back to the window. Seoul glittered below, indifferent and gorgeous. My hand was still at my collar. My heart was doing something I was going to need several hours and a very stern internal conversation to address. I took a long sip of champagne and told myself that Shin Dohwan was just a man. I was not convincing. I was not convincing myself about anything, as it turned out. Because approximately 4 minutes after Shin Dohwan walked away with his quiet eyes and his terrible perceptiveness, his brother appeared. Not Dohwan. Not the cold, calculating one who stood at staircases like a painting of consequence. This one materialized out of the crowd the way a song you didn't ask for starts playing in a store and suddenly you know every word. Effortless, inevitable, slightly infuriating. Shin Yujin, the one who smiled. He was smiling now, walking toward me with a champagne flute and the energy of someone who had decided this corner of the room was exactly where he wanted to be and wasn't going to apologize for it. Where Dohwan had been still, Yujin moved like he enjoyed it. Where Dohwan's attention had felt like a searchlight, Yujin's felt like warm weather. Comfortable, deceptive. I knew better than to trust warm weather in Seoul. It always preceded something. You had a whole conversation with my brother, he said, stopping beside me with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been told he was interrupting. And didn't run away screaming. That's new. The night is young, I said. He laughed. Actually laughed, low and genuine, and I hated that it was a good laugh. The kind that made you want to say something funnier just to hear it again. Shin Yujin, he offered. Seo Jiwon. And before you do the thing your brother did where you study me like a document you're trying to find errors in, I'll save you the time. I'm nobody important. I'm here with my boss has disappeared, and I am actively considering whether the dessert table is worth crossing the entire room for. Eugene glanced toward the dessert table. The macarons are worth it. The chocolate fountain is a trap. Why is the chocolate fountain a trap? Because you have to stand next to Director Bayek from the finance sector to reach it, and he will talk to you for 40 minutes about interest rates. I considered this seriously. Macarons it is. He turned back to me, still smiling, but the quality of it had shifted slightly. Less performance, more genuine. You're funny, he said, like it surprised him. I'm aware, I said. It's a coping mechanism. For what? I smiled back at him, the particular smile I had perfected over years of deflecting questions I had no intention of answering. Polite, impenetrable. For parties, I said simply. Yujin studied me with those dark eyes, and there it was again. That thing. The same quality his brother had, underneath the charm and the easy manner. Attention that was too precise. Focus that went slightly deeper than the surface level of a casual social conversation. The Shin triplets, I was beginning to understand, were not a family of people who accepted the version of you that you presented. They were the kind of people who looked at the presentation, nodded pleasantly, and then quietly began looking for the edges. I adjusted my collar. Yujin's gaze followed the motion. Out you warm. Then why keep the collar up? Warm. Then why keep the collar up? Fashion, I said without missing a beat. It's a look, very editorial. I saw it in a magazine. Which magazine? A very specific one you wouldn't have heard of. His smile widened, and there was something behind it now that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite concern, and sat somewhere in the complicated middle ground that I did not have the emotional bandwidth to map tonight. G1C, he said, and my name in his mouth had a different texture than it had in his brother's. Dohwan had said it carefully, like handling something he didn't want to damage. Yujin said it warmly, like he'd already decided we were going to know each other better than this and was just waiting for me to catch up. Both versions were problems. Don't, I said. He tilted his head. Don't what? Don't be nice to me in that specific way. The way that means something. I don't know you. You don't know me. We are two people at a party who ran out of other people to stand near, and that's fine. That's the whole social contract of events like this. If you're just interesting, I'm not. If you're just interesting, I'm not. You told my brother you were invisible and then explained exactly how invisibility works. That's not what uninteresting people do. That was a mistake, I said. I was nervous. You don't seem nervous. I'm very good at seeming things. He looked at me for a long, unhurried moment. But the party continued around us, all glitter and noise and expensive indifference. And then, from somewhere behind Yujin, across the wide gold room, I felt it again. That pressure shift, that specific change in atmosphere. I looked past Yujin's shoulder. Shin Raehan stood at the center of the room, speaking to someone I didn't recognize. But even as he spoke, even mid-conversation, his gaze had moved. To this corner, to me, the eldest, the coldest, the one Daehyun had said to stay away from most specifically. His expression gave nothing, absolutely nothing. But he was looking, and he had been looking long enough that it wasn't accidental, and the back of my neck was doing the thing again where every instinct I had started quietly filing urgent memos. I looked back at Yujin. Yujin was still watching me with that warm, patient expression. I adjusted my collar for what I was choosing to believe was the last time tonight. So it was not the last time tonight. I adjusted it twice more before Yujin finally, mercifully, got pulled away by a man in a silver tie who clearly needed him for something involving a lot of hand gestures and urgent whispered Korean. Yujin went, but not before giving me one last look over his shoulder. The kind of look that said this conversation is paused, not finished. I did not find that comforting. I found the macaron table instead. The macarons were, as promised, worth it. Pistachio. I ate one standing up like a person with absolutely no social obligations and zero interest in the 3 sets of identical dark eyes that had collectively decided I was their evening's most compelling subject. The dessert table was in a quieter alcove near the back of the hall, partially shielded by an architectural column that I was choosing to treat as emotional protection as well as structural support. I was on my second macaron when Daehyun reappeared. He materialized at my elbow with the energy of a man who had done something mildly catastrophic and was about to make it my problem. I recognized the energy. I had cataloged it extensively over 2 years of employment. Jiwon ah, he said, voice low and very specifically casual in the way that meant nothing about this was casual. No, I said. I haven't said anything. You have the face, I said. The face where you've done something and need me to either fix it or stand next to it so it looks less like a mistake. Which is it tonight? Daehyun had the audacity to look briefly impressed before smoothing it back into charm. The Shin brothers have requested an introduction. I stopped chewing. All three, he added helpfully. I swallowed the macaron, set the plate down, turned to face him with the full and undivided attention of a man who was choosing his next words with the precision of someone diffusing something. Kwon Daehyun, I said. I am your assistant. I manage your schedule, your correspondence, your meetings, and on 3 separate occasions your personal crises. I do not get introduced to Mafia triplets as a social offering. It's not like that. Then what is it like? He straightened his cuffs. Raehan SSI noticed you earlier. He asked who you were. I told him you were my associate. Oh, he said he'd like to meet you. You told him I was your associate? It sounds better than assistant. It sounds like you promoted me without the salary adjustment, I said. And it still doesn't explain why I have to go stand in front of 3 of the most dangerous men in Seoul because one of them pointed at me. He didn't point. Daehyun. Jiwon. He met my eyes and for once dropped the performance completely. Just for a second. They're important. Tonight is important. I need this connection, and you are the most composed person in this building. You already spoke to 2 of them without catastrophe. Just meet Raehan. Be yourself. Mostly yourself. The polished version. The polished version of myself is exhausted and wants to go home. The employed version of yourself is going to walk across that room. I looked at him. He looked back. The column behind me provided no spiritual comfort whatsoever. Fine, I said. But I want that salary adjustment. He was already steering me by the elbow. The walk across the grand hall felt significantly longer than it had any geometrical right to be. The crowd seemed to part in that particular way it always did around the Shin brothers, leaving a clear radius of respectful distance that everyone maintained without being told. Like gravitational pull, like instinct. Raehan stood at the center of it. Up close, he was different from his brothers in ways that were difficult to immediately articulate. Yujin's warmth and Dohwan's stillness were readable. Raehan was neither. He occupied space with a kind of authority that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. He wasn't performing power. He simply had it, the way certain rooms have temperature before you can name the source. He looked at me when I approached, dark eyes steady as a held breath. Shin Raehan, he said. No smile, no warmth. I'd 1 centimeter and then reconsidering 1 centimeter and then reconsidering. You spoke with my brothers, he said. They spoke with me, I said. I was standing near a window minding my macarons. Daehyun made a small sound beside me that he converted into a cough. Raehan studied me for a moment that stretched just long enough to be deliberate. And yet you're still here. Your brother recommended the macarons, I said. I have good follow-through. Dohwan appeared on Raehan's left, quiet as ever. Yujin materialized on the right with that warm, ready expression, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment and was pleased it had arrived. 3 of them, in a loose half-circle, looking at me. I had been in uncomfortable situations before. I had navigated them with stillness and deflection, and the 3 layers of scent blocker that kept my biology from announcing itself to every alpha in a 50-meter radius. I was fine. I was composed. I was the polished version. Then Raehan's gaze dropped. to my collar. Not quickly, not obviously, just a single, unhurried downward glance, and then back to my face. His eyes had changed, still unreadable, but something behind them had sharpened in a way that made my stomach do something complicated and unwelcome. "You keep adjusting it," he said quietly. Not an accusation, something closer to an observation that had been sitting with him for a while. My hand had moved to my throat before I'd registered deciding to move it. All three of them watched. I smiled, polished, impenetrable. "Sensitive neck," I said. None of them looked convinced, which was, frankly, rude. I had delivered that line with complete confidence and a smile that had gotten me through 2 years of Daehyun's chaos, 3 near-panic attacks in public bathrooms, and 1 very memorable incident involving a misfiled contract and an angry board of directors. It was a good smile. It deserved better reception. Yujin tilted his head. "You said that to Dohwan already." "It was true then, too," I said. "Is it?" Raehan asked. The question landed differently than I expected. Not aggressive. Not probing in the way powerful men usually probed, which was with the energy of someone already certain they knew the answer and just wanted to watch you squirm reaching it. He asked it the way you ask something you actually want to know. Quiet. Direct. Like the question deserved honesty, and he was prepared to wait for it. I did not give him honesty. I gave him the smile again. "Jiwon si." Dohwan's voice came from my left, low and measured. "You don't have to answer things you don't want to answer." I turned to look at him. He was watching me with that same careful attention from the window earlier, and there was something in it now that I couldn't immediately categorize. Not pity, not curiosity exactly. Something more careful than either. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than I wanted to. Daehyun, who had been standing slightly behind me with the energy of a man watching a situation he had started but no longer controlled, chose this moment to insert himself. "Jiwon manages my entire operation," he said warmly, in the tone of someone re-establishing context. "Brilliant with logistics, extremely discreet." "Discreet," Raehan repeated, eyes still on me. "It's a marketable quality," I said. "In certain industries," Yujin said pleasantly, and the implication hung in the air between all of us like expensive perfume. I looked at him. He smiled back, unbothered, champagne held loosely. And I had the distinct impression that Shin Yujin found the entire world mildly entertaining and had decided some time ago to simply enjoy it. "I work in logistics management," I said clearly. "Not whatever industry you're implying." I wasn't implying anything. You were implying something. I was making an observation. About discretion. About value, he corrected, and his voice had shifted just slightly, the amusement still there, but underneath it something genuine. People who are discreet and capable and don't rattle under pressure are valuable. That's not an implication. That's a fact. I looked at him for a moment, then at Dohwan, then, reluctantly, at Raehan, who had been watching this entire exchange with the focused patience of someone who did all his most important thinking in silence. The room hummed around us. Somewhere across the hall, a small orchestra had begun playing something soft and expensive. The city glittered through the tall windows, and I stood in the middle of 3 identical faces, each one looking at me with a different flavor of attention that all somehow landed in the same place. Too close. Too much. Too specific. My collar felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the fabric. "Excuse me," I said. "I need some air." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and moved through the crowd toward the side terrace, the one I'd clocked on the way in because I always clocked exits. The glass doors were heavy and cool under my hands, and then I was outside, sole air on my face, city noise rising up from below like a living thing. I walked to the railing, gripped it, breathed. The Han River was a dark ribbon below, lights reflected in broken pieces across its surface. I watched it and focused on the sensation of cold metal under my palms and the specific work of making my heartbeat return to something that could be described as normal. I had been fine all evening, composed, controlled. 3 layers of scent blocker and a collar up to my jaw and a smile that deflected everything. I had been fine, and then 3 men with the same face had looked at me like they could see through every single layer. I pressed my fingers against the collar, felt the edge of the fabric. Underneath it, against my skin, was the topography of something I had spent 3 years making sure no one ever saw. Burns don't fade the way people say they do. They settle. They become part of you. I'm permanent and pale and raised and entirely mine in a way that felt more like ownership than anything I had ever chosen. I had not chosen them. I heard the terrace door open behind me. I didn't turn around. I already knew from the quality of the footstep, measured and unhurried, who it was. Raehan stopped beside me at the railing. Not touching. A foot of space between us. He looked out at the city and said nothing. And the silence between us had a different texture than the silence inside. Less performance in it. Less pressure. We stood there for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said finally. "I know," I said. "But I want you to know that we noticed." He paused. "Not the collar. Not whatever you're hiding under it. We noticed you. Before that." My grip on the railing tightened slightly. "Why?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, eyes on the river. "Because you walked into a room full of alphas," he said. "Mike, and you were the only person in it who wasn't afraid of us and wasn't pretending not to be afraid of us. You were just genuinely, completely unbothered." I laughed despite myself, short and real. "I was bothered," I admitted. "I'm very good at seeming things." "I know," he said. And somehow, in his voice, that wasn't an accusation. It was the beginning of something. I just hadn't decided yet whether that something was good or catastrophic. Based on my personal history, the odds were running about 30-70. Raehan was still looking at the city. I was still looking at the river. The space between us was exactly 1 foot of soul night air and approximately 3 years of things I had never told anyone, and I was not about to close either distance. "You should go back inside," I said. "People notice when men like you disappear from rooms." "People notice everything about men like us," he said. "We stopped managing that a long time ago." "Must be nice." "Is it?" He turned his head slightly. "To have everyone watching every move you make, waiting for you to do something that confirms whatever they already decided about you?" I looked at him. He looked back, and the city lights caught the edge of his jaw, and he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. The kind of tired that lived behind composed expressions and never fully left. I recognized that tired, and I owned several versions of it. "Fair point," I said quietly. The terrace door opened again. Yujin came through it first, naturally, because Yujin moved through the world like he had already been invited to everything. Dohwan followed, 2 steps behind, hands in his pockets, expression the same steady, unreadable thing it had been all evening. I looked at the 3 of them and then at the door behind them and performed a rapid, realistic assessment of my options. "I didn't plan this," I said. "Neither did we," Yujin said cheerfully, coming to stand on my other side so that I was now flanked, which was a geometrical situation I had very specifically not consented to. "You're surrounding me. We're enjoying the view," he said, gesturing toward the city with his champagne glass. "The view is in that direction," I said, pointing outward. "You're looking at me." "You're more interesting than the Han River," Dohwan said from Raehan's other side, and delivered it so calmly and without any apparent awareness that it was an extraordinarily direct thing to say that I had absolutely no prepared response for it. I opened my mouth, closed it. Yujin looked delighted. "Don't," I told him. I didn't say anything. You were about to say something. I was about to agree with Dohwan, he said, diplomatically, with more charm. It doesn't need more charm. It needs to be said less. Raehan made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the structural cousin of one. I turned to look at him, startled, and found the edge of something almost warm in his expression. Almost. Like sunlight through a gap in very serious curtains. The problem, I was understanding with increasing clarity, was that the Shin brothers were not what I had expected. I had expected cold authority and casual menace and the kind of conversation that felt like a business transaction with your well-being as the commodity. I had prepared for that. I had armor for that. I did not have armor for this. For three men who looked at me like I was something worth understanding. Before they noticed anything else. Before they noticed anything else. I didn't have armor for genuine. My fingers moved to my collar. I caught myself mid-motion this time, hand halfway to my throat, and made myself stop. Put my hand back on the railing. Looked at the river. The silence stretched. And then, from inside the hall came a sound. A voice. Raised. Not shouting, not yet, but carrying that particular pitch of someone who was about to. I recognized the voice before I recognized why I recognized it. The way you sometimes know a smell before you place the memory. My stomach dropped. Raehan had already turned toward the glass doors, alert without being obvious about it. Dohwan straightened by a degree. Yujin's champagne glass lowered slowly, his expression shifting from warm to watchful in the space of one breath. "Who is that?" Yujin asked. Not to anyone specifically. I knew who it was. I knew the exact cadence of that voice when it started to rise. I knew the pace of it and the pattern of it, and the specific way it changed quality when the person using it had decided that the social contract of public spaces no longer applied to him. "My former employer," I said. My voice came out level. I was proud of that. All three of them turned to look at me. "Former," Raehan said. "As of 8 months ago," I said. "We had a disagreement about workplace conduct." "What kind of disagreement?" Dohwan asked. I looked through the glass doors. Inside, across the gold room, I could see him now. Oh, Sunjin. 43 years old, tailored gray suit. The particular posture of a man who had never in his adult life been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He was speaking to someone near the bar, voice climbing, finger pointed. My hand found my collar before I could stop it this time. I pressed the fabric up, hard. And Raehan, standing 1 foot away, watched my hand with eyes that had gone very quiet and very still, and said nothing. And somehow that was worse than if he'd said everything. "Jiwon-si," he said softly. "I'm fine," I said, the two most load-bearing words in my vocabulary. Deployed again, right on schedule. None of them moved away, which meant I had to. "I'm going to get water," I said. Pushing off the railing with the casual energy of a man making a completely voluntary and unbothered decision. Not because of anything happening inside, just thirsty. Hydration is important. "Jiwon-si," Yujin said. "Truly, very important. The human body is 60% water and I have been neglecting mine all evening." "You don't have to go in there," Dohwan said. "I'm not going in there because of him," I said. "I'm going in there because I want water." All three of them looked at me with varying expressions of quiet, unconvinced patience. I went inside anyway. The thing about Sunjin was that he existed in rooms the way certain weather systems existed. You felt him before you saw him clearly. The pressure dropped. The air changed. And every instinct I had, every carefully constructed layer of composure I had built over 8 months of distance and 3 years of surviving him. He collected a glass of water from a passing tray, drank half of it standing up, and positioned myself behind a cluster of guests with a clear sightline to the bar where Sunjin was still talking. Still loud, Like the person he was talking at had developed the specific posture of someone who had stopped listening and was simply waiting for a pause long enough to escape. I recognized that posture intimately. He hadn't seen me yet. That was fine. I would finish my water, find Daehyun, tell him we were leaving, and exit the building with my dignity and my secrets both intact. Solid plan. Excellent plan. Seo Jiwon. The voice hit the back of my neck like cold water. He had seen me. I turned around slowly, with all the energy of a man who was completely unsurprised and completely unbothered, and had definitely not just felt his entire stomach relocate. Sunjin stood 6 feet away, gray suit, the smile he wore when he wanted an audience to think he was delighted while the person he was smiling at understood exactly what the smile actually meant. Sunjin si? I said. Pleasant, level, the polished version. I didn't expect to see you here. He closed the distance by 2 steps, eyes moving over me in the assessing way they always had, cataloging, measuring, looking for the thing he could use. You look well? I am well, I said. Enjoy your evening. I turned to leave. His hand closed around my wrist. Not violently. That was never how he did it. It was social, friendly. The kind of grip that looked like nothing from the outside, that no one in a golden gala hall would clock as what it was. Just 2 people who knew each other. Just a hand on a wrist. I stopped. We should catch up, he said. It's been a while. 8 months, I said. I've been busy. So I heard. Working for Kwon Dae-hyun now. His thumb pressed slightly against the inside of my wrist. Doing well for yourself. I try. You always did. The smile hadn't moved. I heard you've been telling people about the circumstances of your departure. That's disappointing, Jiwona. We agreed it was mutual. I agreed to nothing, I said quietly. I left. After making accusations that could have caused significant damage. After documenting things that were true, I said, still quiet, still level, and choosing not to use them, which was generosity you didn't deserve, and we both know it. His grip tightened. 1 degree, just 1. But I felt it the way you feel a temperature drop before a storm. Careful, he said softly, and the social warmth drained out of his voice completely, like leaving just the thing underneath it that I had spent 3 years learning the exact shape of. You're in a room full of people who know me. You're a nobody assistant with a sealed complaint and no proof that matters. Be smart. I looked at him, at the smile still arranged on his face for the room's benefit, at the hand on my wrist. And I felt it then, rising up through the composure and the 3 layers of scent blocker and the 8 months of careful distance. Not fear. Like I was past fear with him. Something cleaner than fear. Rage. Quiet, cold, and entirely mine. Let go of my wrist, I said. Jiwona? I won't say it twice. He laughed softly. Or what? Or, said a voice from directly behind me, calm and cold and carrying the specific quality of authority that didn't need volume to land like a wall. You'll find out what happens when you put your hand on something that isn't yours in a room full of people who are watching you do it. Sunjin's smile fractured. Just at the edges. Just enough. I didn't have to turn around to know who was standing behind me. I knew from the quality of the silence that arrived with him, from the way Sungjin's eyes moved upward by 2 inches, recalibrating, from the shift in the air that I'd felt twice before tonight on a terrace and a corridor, and understood now, with full and complete clarity, meant Shin Raehan had entered a radius and made a decision. Sungjin released my wrist. I turned around. Raehan stood close, not touching me, just present, the way a wall is present. Dohwan was 2 steps to his left, Yujin 1 step to his right. 3 of them unhurried, looking at Sungjin with expressions that contained no anger at all, which was somehow the most frightening thing in the room. Sungjin straightened his cuffs. Shin Raehan si, he said, recovering the smile. I didn't realize. You should go, Raehan said. Simple, final. The conversational equivalent of a door closing. Sunjin went. I watched him disappear into the crowd. Then I looked down at my wrist. Then forward at three men who had followed me inside a building because they had looked at me on a terrace and decided, without being asked, that I was worth following. My collar had shifted during the confrontation, pulled slightly to the left, exposing just at the edge, just barely, the lowest border of scarring that crept up from my collarbone. Yujin saw it first. I watched his eyes drop and then come back up to my face with an expression that had gone very soft and very careful. Then Dohwan. Then Raehan. All three of them seeing the edge of the thing I had spent every minute of this evening making sure no one saw. Nobody spoke. I reached up, adjusted my collar, covered it again. Thank you, I said. My voice was steady. I was so tired of my voice being steady. Jiwon si? Yujin said quietly. No warmth this time. Something more serious beneath it. Who did that to you? The question sat in the air between us. I looked at him, at all three of them. And for the first time all evening, I had absolutely nothing ready to say. Which was, historically, a very dangerous place for me to be. And to people I had known for approximately 2 hours at a gala in Gangnam, regardless of how many times they had shown up exactly when I needed them to. That's not a question I'm answering tonight, I said. Okay, Dohwan said immediately. I blinked. Okay? Okay, he repeated. Same calm, same steadiness. Like he had asked a question, received a boundary, and filed it without argument. Like that was just how things worked. I looked at Yujin, waiting for him to push. He didn't. He was watching me with that careful softness, champagne forgotten in his hand, and he gave me a small nod that somehow communicated both I heard you and I'm not going anywhere in the same gesture. Raehan said nothing. He was looking at the space where Sunjin had disappeared into the crowd, and the quality of his silence had changed. It was colder now, more deliberate, in the silence of someone making a decision rather than waiting for one. Don't, I said to him. He looked at me. Whatever you're thinking about doing, I said. Don't, not tonight, not on my behalf. He put his hand on you, Raehan said. I noticed, I was there. In a room full of people who saw it and did nothing. People generally don't involve themselves in other people's problems at these events, I said. It's considered impolite. I'm not known for politeness. Shin Raehan. I said his full name and watched something shift in his expression at the directness of it. I have been managing Sunjin and people exactly like him for 3 years. I did not need rescuing. I needed 30 more seconds and I would have handled it myself. A pause. I know, he said. And he meant it. I could hear that he meant it. That's not why I stepped in. Then why? He looked at me steadily. Because I wanted to. The answer was so simple and so direct that it bypassed every deflection I had and landed somewhere undefended. I felt it in my chest, small and warm and deeply inconvenient. I looked away first. The macaron table is still over there, Yujin offered, with the gentle timing of someone who understood exactly when a conversation needed a door left open rather than pushed through. We could relocate. You want to discuss this at the macaron table, I said. I want to not discuss this anywhere, he said pleasantly. I want to stand near you and eat expensive pastries and let you have 5 minutes where nothing is required of you. I stared at him. He looked back, open and easy and completely serious underneath the warmth. The thing about Shin Yujin I was understanding was that the charm was real. It wasn't a performance layered over something colder. It was genuinely him. And what lived underneath the charm was something warmer and more careful than I had any framework for. All three of them were like that. Different surfaces, same foundation. Something solid that I had no business leaning on and was fighting very hard not to lean on anyway. We relocated to the macaron table. I ate a pistachio one, then a rose one. Dohwan stood beside me and said nothing, and somehow made the silence feel like company. Yujin found the good macarons, the ones at the back that hadn't been touched, and distributed them with the seriousness of someone performing an important task. Raehan stood slightly apart, watching the room, but his positioning had shifted. He was facing outward, away from me, toward the room, between me and everyone else in it. I noticed. I filed it away in the category of things I was going to think about very seriously at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. "Can I ask you something?" Yujin said. After a comfortable stretch of macaron-related silence. "You can ask," I said. "I reserve the right to not answer." "Fair." He picked up a pale green one and examined it. "You said you're good at seeming things. What do you seem like normally? To people who don't look closely." I considered this. Quiet, competent, slightly hard to read. "And to people who look closely?" "Nobody looks closely," I said. "That's the whole point of the system." "We looked closely," Dohwan said from my other side. "But I noticed," I said. "I'm still deciding how I feel about it." "And?" Yujin asked. I ate the rest of my macaron. The rose one was better than the pistachio. That felt like important information. "Ask me later," I said. Yujin smiled. "The real one. The good laugh version." "So, there's a later." I said, "Ask me later," not that there's a later. "You implied it." I implied nothing. I deflected. There's a difference. "Not in this case," Raehan said from my right, without turning around. "Fingers found the fabric. I didn't press fingers found the fabric. I didn't press it up. I just rested them there, against my own throat, feeling my own pulse under the cotton and underneath that, raised and permanent and entirely mine, the edges of everything I had spent 3 years hiding." Raehan turned then, looked at my hand, looked at my face. "Fight to be tonight." I did not plan it. I want to be tonight. I did not plan it. I want to be clear about that. I had a system. The system had worked for 3 years. The system involved high collars and scent blockers and the kind of practice deflection that could redirect a conversation the way water redirects around stone. Smoothly, without drama, without anyone noticing the stone was ever there. The system did not account for Shin Dohwan quietly passing me a glass of water, and his fingers brushing mine, and the warmth of that accidental contact moving up my arm and landing somewhere directly behind my sternum and staying there. It did not account for Yujin laughing at something I said and turning to me with his whole face open like I was the most interesting weather system he had encountered all year. It did not account for Raehan, who had spent the last 20 minutes standing between me and the rest of the room without making it a performance, without asking for acknowledgement, just doing it because he had decided to. The system, it turned out, was not built for people who showed up genuinely. We had moved from the macaron table to a quieter sitting area near the far window, the 4 of us occupying a cluster of low chairs while the gala continued its expensive business around us. Daehyun had appeared briefly. Ma clocked the situation with the rapid assessment of a man who understood social architecture and excused himself with a smile that I was going to address with him very thoroughly on Monday. It was just the 4 of us, the city below, the soft orchestral murmur from across the hall. I don't know exactly when my hand stopped being at my collar. I noticed it in retrospect, the way you notice a headache is gone only after it leaves. One moment I was holding the fabric up, and the next my hand was in my lap, and the collar had shifted, and nobody had said anything, and the air had not changed, and the world had not ended. Yujin was telling a story about a business dinner in Busan that had gone sideways in a specific way involving a misidentified fish dish and a very offended client. And I was laughing, actually laughing, at the way he described the moment the lid came off the wrong platter, And somewhere in the middle of that laugh, I felt Dohwan's eyes on the left side of my neck. Not staring, just aware. I turned to look at him. He met my eyes, looked briefly, gently, at my collar where it had shifted, then back to my face with a question in his expression that asked nothing out loud and demanded nothing at all. I reached up and pulled the collar down, not dramatically, not all at once like a revelation performed for an audience. Just a quiet fold of fabric, fingers steady, but exposing the scarring that ran from my collarbone up the left side of my neck. Pale and raised and permanent and entirely, completely mine. Yujin's story stopped. Not with a sharp intake of breath. Not with the particular horrified silence I had spent 3 years dreading from every person who might have seen. It stopped gently, like a song reaching a natural pause. All 3 of them looked. Nobody flinched. Raehan's jaw tightened, barely visible. His eyes moved from the scars to my face and stayed there with an expression that was not pity, not shock, not the carefully managed concern of someone who didn't know what to do with what they were seeing. It was something quieter, something that looked uncomfortably close to the feeling of finally. "Oh, Sunjin," Yujin said. Not a question. "Among other things," I said. My voice was steady. Genuinely this time, not performed. It was a long 3 years. "You don't have to explain it," Dohwan said. "I know." I looked at the scars the way I rarely let myself look at them, directly, without flinching away. "I wanted to show you. I don't know why. That's unsettling." "It means you trust us," Yujin said simply. "I've known you for 4 hours." And yet, I looked at him, at the 3 of them, and something that I had held behind my ribs for a very long time, and something heavy and quiet and load-bearing in the way that painful things become load-bearing when you carry them alone long enough, shifted. Not gone, not fixed, just lighter. "I used to think they were the worst thing about me," I said. "Took me a while to understand they were just part of me, a part I didn't choose, but still mine." Raehan leaned forward then, elbows on his knees, closing the distance between us by a few careful inches. "They're not the worst thing about you," he said. "Nah, you want to know what I've noticed about you tonight? I feel like you're going to tell me regardless." The curtain gap smile again. Fuller this time. "You walked into a room that should have been hostile and made it yours without trying. You set 3 boundaries and held all of them. You made Dohwan speak voluntarily in a social setting, which hasn't happened at one of these events in approximately 2 years." Dohwan looked at him. "That's an exaggeration." "It's not," Yujin confirmed cheerfully. "Those are the things I noticed," Raehan continued, eyes back on me, steady and warm in the specific way of someone who did not say things they didn't mean. "Not the collar, not the scars, you, Seo Jiwon." I looked at him for a long moment, then at Yujin, who was watching me with his whole heart apparently just living on his face with no protective covering whatsoever. Then at Dohwan, who reached over and without preamble or drama placed his hand over mine where it rested on the chair arm. Warm, certain, not asking anything, just present. "This is insane," I said. "You understand that, right? All 3 of you. This entire evening." "Completely insane," Yujin agreed. "We'd like to take you to dinner," Raehan said. "Tomorrow, properly. All 3 of you. All 3 of us." "That's not how dinner works." "It can be," Dohwan said, and turned his hand so his palm was up, in an open question rather than a statement, and waited. I looked at his open hand. I thought about 3 years of high collars and practiced deflection, and the particular exhaustion of being invisible by necessity rather than choice. I thought about a macaron table and a terrace, and 3 men who had looked at me and kept looking, past every layer of the system, and not once made me feel like what they found was too much, or not enough. I placed my hand in Dohwan's. "One dinner," I said. And I'm ordering for myself. Yujin's laugh filled the quiet corner like light filling a room when someone finally opens the curtains. Raehan smiled. A full one this time. No curtains. It was, I would think later, the best thing I had seen all evening. And for the first time in 3 years, I left my collar exactly where it was. Down. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you'll definitely love the next one. It's even wilder and more intriguing than you can imagine, so be sure to check it out and hit subscribe. The next story drops soon,